I love the message from today's guest. Take the risk. Do it. If you have an idea, if you have an inkling, if you have an inspiration, take the risk. My guest today on the Clean Power Hour is Tom Weirich. He is the author of a wonderful book, We Took the Risk. It chronicles the founders, the technologists, the thought leaders, the legislators, the nonprofit leaders who really created this vibrant clean energy industry that we have in North America. Tom started his clean energy career at ACOR, the American Council on Renewable Energy, in his 20s. So he has now spent his entire career working in and among clean energy professionals. He's the head of marketing for EDP North America, the number 4 global clean energy company, and he has an amazing story to tell. So it's just my great honor and pleasure to bring Tom on the show. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour, Tom Weirich.
Hey, it's great to see you, Tim. How are you doing?
It is amazing what you have done in We Took the Risk. I just want to acknowledge that. It is really, truly an awesome compilation of stories and interviews that you have done. And it's a very interesting read. I encourage all of our listeners to check out the book. It has its own website, wetooktherisk.com. So just go there. You'll find many places, including Powell's Bookstore, which is one of my favorite places to buy books. But Tom, what inspired you to write this book? And then we'll get a little more into your background because you also have a storied history in clean energy. But why this now?
Definitely. Well, thanks again, Tim, for having me. So, the story, the story came about, the book came about really at the confluence of 2 different events that were happening at the same time, just showing you how life is unpredictable in its ways. I was starting to write an op-ed for a dear mentor of mine that passed away, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Holmberg, who many consider the godfather of biomass and biofuels here in the United States. And I had missed his funeral because of a business trip, not a good reason. And in looking back, I wanted to kind of make amends and also make sure that his story, as well as the traits he embodied, were out there for renewables risk takers, entrepreneurs, and those entering the industry to really latch onto as they begin or create a greater impact in the renewables industry. So I started writing an op-ed and interview CEOs that were interns of his during his long career in the industry. And a lot of stories started to come out that were interesting. I'm like, okay, I wish I had known this when I started myself in renewables. And so I started to write that and research that for an intention of pitching, Biofuels magazine and other magazines to place that. Simultaneously, I got an outreach from a professor of mine, Eric Hester, who started up something called the Creator Institute and the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, where he was fostering an environment where he wanted to create thousands of first-time authors, right, that were writing about quote-unquote big ideas in the world that really need to be explored. And he had been pursuing me for about 4 years, and I kept on declining. And finally, funny enough and uncannily enough, he reached out to me that week that I started writing this op-ed for Bill and said, hey, I think you have a story to tell. And I kind of felt, Bill being involved in this ask. And I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And so that's how it all came together. And thanks to Eric and the team at my publisher, New Degree Press, we made it a reality.
I love that a mentor of yours inspired such incredible work as this book. And, we all stand on the shoulders of other people. And sometimes we Americans are a little slow to acknowledge that. We have this tradition of pulling oneself up, quote unquote, by their bootstraps. Well, who made those bootstraps and who made those boots? So, I myself, I love to acknowledge my father, Peter Montague. I stand on his shoulders in so many ways. He introduced me to renewable energy in our backyard in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the early 70s. And I didn't come full circle and work in clean energy full time, until 2016. I was a slow learner, I guess. But anyway, Tom, you were not a slow learner. You were an early adopter. You got interested in this industry, as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, fresh out of grad school young man. What was your entree, and why have you stayed so long?
Yeah, no, good question. And I think the reason I've stayed so long, I'll go kind of backwards in answering the question. The reason I stayed so long is, to your point, we do stand on the previous generation of renewables entrepreneurs, right? And we're only as good as the entrepreneurial spirit this industry embodies. So, I got started purely, falling in love with renewables. I was in my, like you mentioned, I was in my early 20s, coming fresh out of grad school and in a failed Silicon Valley career where I try to, start up there. And in relocating to Washington, I got linked into the American Council on Renewable Energy, specifically through the founder, Mike Eckhart, and his colleague, Jody Roussel, who is a good friend of mine. And they really introduced me into the political sphere of renewable energy. And, back then in 2003, 2004, this was an industry that was starving for skill set versus knowledge in renewables. It was an industry also trying to find its way through the political halls of Washington, through Wall Street, and through Silicon Valley, right? Figuring out what would the next technological boom look like. So it was a really exciting time. And, I state it's still an exciting time. We still have a challenge in front of us and great opportunities to advance the industry. So just as when I entered back then in 2004, I think those coming into the renewables industry now have a great opportunity to make an impact. And folks, Tim, like you and I, still can make an impact, right? In whatever work we do. And we all are also a community of supporters. I mean, that's something that I covered in the book, is just how closely linked we all are together. And it is a symbiotic relationship. We all have to stick in together to really accomplish the goals we have, especially with the passage of the recently, passed IRA Act.
Yeah, once you get into solar, wind, or battery storage, and you make some key connections, you realize that you're just 1 degree of or 2 degrees of separation from some truly foundational figures who were instrumental in laying the groundwork for, things like PPAs and, commercialization of technologies that are now going mainstream in the form of, massive wind turbines and heat batteries and, of course, solar photovoltaics. So, one of the things that was constantly on my mind when I read your book was, gosh, I'm so curious about who didn't make it into the book, because it is an amazing cast of characters. And I do want you to touch on a few of those individual stories. The founder of Standard Solar, for example, and characters like Jigar Shah, who now heads up the DOE Loan Program Office and really has created so many alumni who have made such an impact, right? He started SunEdison, which created the first modern PPA in North America. And literally there's dozens and dozens of impactful clean energy companies now that pass through those halls. But how did you decide, who makes the cut, so to speak? And this isn't about who's better than others. All of these stories are important, but it seems to me like a very difficult task. And then also, I'm curious, is there a European version of this book? Because Europe was also an early adopter, and there are lots and lots of risk takers in the European clean energy economy. And I'm curious how you think about that.
Definitely. Well, I'm the first one to admit the book is not perfect, right? But it's a start. And it was a gut-wrenching decision. I did interview over 100 executives, and I had to narrow it down to 25 executives, right? So as a first-time author, you're really usually restricted in the length of your book and how many pages you have, right? So I had to, reduce down the list and call down the list. And there are two factors that factor into how I did that, right? Number one was this lens of risk-taking, right? Many people sacrifice a lot to be in renewables, right? Be it being away from family, putting in financial risk, right? Putting their own home on, home mortgage, taking a loan against their house, right? To fund seed funds.
Like Jigar did.
Right? So many people do that. But, for me, it was a question of, did they take a risk, number one? But number two, did they create some kind of long-lasting impact that both you and I experience in our day-to-day work in renewables, right? So those are the two lenses I used, right, to cull it down to the 25. And it was tough. I mean, also another lens I took was, okay, were these people that somehow impacted my specific career? And as I was writing this book, my revisions editor kept on reminding me, Tom, there's something missing in this book. And I'm like, well, what is it? And she's like, your story. You weren't just a wallflower. You weren't just a fly on the wall. You were actually part of these stories. And so, as I wrote this book, I tried to make all of you as readers feel like me, being there in the room, but also engaging with all these monumental risk takers, right, that have formed this industry. So, like you mentioned, Jigar Shah was in the book, Tony Clifford, the founder of Standard Solar, who founded it with many other people, right? And I tried to build in many other individuals. So 25 executives were covered. There are another 25 actually that were implied and in the stories and the chapters themselves. And I would say the other ones that I really felt strongly about were Nancy Floyd, right, one of the first female venture capitalists in the space. Obviously, there's many more. Nancy Fund from DBL comes to mind also, right? So I wish, if I did another iteration of this book, right, or a second iteration, definitely I'd say people that I missed out on were some of the more important VC players, Nancy Fund, obviously Ira Enterprise, who facilitated the Tesla IPO. Also, another segment that I missed out on that I wish I had included, or I will hopefully include if I do a second book, are the journalists, folks like you, Tim. I mean, there's so many journalists, especially the Canary Media team, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance team. There's so many stories of journalists that kept us honest and journalists that actually kept the momentum going for this industry in the last 20 years. So that's another group I would definitely cover. And then there are many others, right? There's many others, I would say, from the ED&I perspective that are really progressed and pushed forward the industry that I definitely want to include in another book. So, those are folks that I definitely would include. Now, in terms of Europe, there is no book that I know of really that covers a lot of this. Now, I did cover Herman Scheer and the impact he had in creating feed-in tariffs that then helped, Germany, especially, and the rest of Europe, accelerate the adoption of renewables, right? So I think there are books, on Herman Scheer. There are books that he actually wrote himself that are out there in the market. But it's interesting. There's stories to be shared, I would say, not only in Europe, but also in Asia. I touch upon Dr. Shi, who started up Suntech, who was one of the IPOs that John Cavalier ran a process on. Dr. Shi was fascinating himself in China and starting up Suntech and the fall and the rise and the fall rather of Suntech, right? So stories like that are ones I think we should definitely talk about. And again, all these folks had failures, they had successes, but it's through their failures that they got to the success they have today. So I think that's another key message I have in this book is that we all experience failures. It's what happens after we fail that's the most important thing.
I'm glad you mentioned Nancy Floyd. She was one of the first female venture capitalists. She got behind wind energy in a big way. And, you still see her footprints on the California landscape, right, with those early wind farms in Northern California.
Yeah, every time you drive through Ultima Pass, those wind turbines that are like aging up there, those are the ones that she actually was involved with. So every time I drive through the Ultima Pass out of the Bay Area, I think of Nancy Floyd.
And I like to think that California is our Europe. The Europeans glommed onto clean energy faster than we did because energy is expensive in Europe. We're spoiled with cheap fossil fuels here in the U.S. We have massive coal reserves. I live in a coal state. I stand on the coal industry shoulders. My grandpa Murphy ran the Black Diamond magazine in Chicago, a coal industry trade magazine. And I don't take it lightly that we are making an energy transition. I have nothing against the fossil fuel industry, honestly. It was a tremendous boon for society, and it brought us into the modern era. And now we are just making yet another energy transition. Humanity has done this many, many times. We didn't end the Stone Age because we ran out of stone, right? And so it's a natural phenomenon. And I like to say that, here in the Midwest, we're phasing out the farming of corn and beans and starting to farm solar directly and creating electrons to power society with the sun's rays. It's no different, really, right? We want to take care of the land. We want to create a better future for our children and our children's children. And that's one of the things I love about the clean energy industry is we are pro-human, we're pro-economics, and we're pro-landowner, and it really is a win-win-win.
Oh, so I don't agree. I mean, there's two things I wanted to latch on just to riff off of what you just said. First of all, with the oil and gas, in respect to the oil and gas industry, when the book first launched, I'm closing in on 1,000 books already sold within 3 weeks, which is phenomenal.
Oh, congratulations. That's incredible.
It really is. It's both exciting and terrifying because it's out there and I can't take it back, right? But when the book launched, the number one trending category it launched in terms of best-selling trends was petroleum. And that's solely due to, I think, the number of folks in the oil and gas industry who are looking at renewables and going, you know what, there's something here. We want to learn more. And I think that's one of the key messages I have coming out of this book is, listen, this book is for anybody looking to get into this industry. We are open arms. We are hiring. We're growing. And I do believe all those folks that are involved in the oil and gas industry that got us to where we are today have a role to play in the future renewable energy industry. So that's the number one message I have. Number two, what's been really heartwarming is a lot of folks have been taking pictures with the book and posting on social media. And I would say 70% of the time they've taken pictures with their kids. And even Pat Wood, who wrote an early review for the book, Pat Wood, who was the former FERC commissioner of the George W. Bush administration, said to me, listen, I'm giving this book to my 4 sons to show them there's so many different ways to get involved in renewables, right? Based on the skill sets and the passion you have. And that's another message I have here is bring your passion to the doorstep. We're here, we're available. But, like I say, and controversially in chapter 3, right? Renewables is not for everybody. You really have to sense this calling and you have to really want to create an impact, not only for yourself, for your career, but also for the industry in large. So, thanks for letting me riff off of you, but those are the messages I definitely want to make sure are out there.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and a review. Back to the show. And I always like to remind our listeners that if you're in an adjacent industry, if you're in an adjacent energy industry or wanting to get into a new and growing industry, please reach out to me. I can help you get a toehold in clean energy, and Tom can help you, and Nico Johnson can help you, and Jigger Shah can help you. And together we are one big happy family, and we will help you. I also want to give a shout out to my listeners and say, look, if you cannot afford to buy this book, I will buy you 5 copies. Okay. So reach out to me and then you can gift it to your family because this is a wonderful gift. I'm going to give it to my children for Christmas. I love that idea. The next generation needs to know the shoulders that we stand on and what's possible and how these things take off. There has to be a early adopter and risk taker, and that's not for everyone. There's room for all types of personalities in this industry, right? You could be the most conservative, staid person in the world and find a niche in clean energy. But Tom, let's talk a little more about the early days. You joined ACOR, the American Council on Renewable Energy, which is a very big umbrella organization for all things clean. And just give our listeners some background on the early days at ACOR and how it's evolved, in the subsequent decades.
Definitely. Well, ACOR will always be a special place for me. It's it was my platform off of which I started up my renewables career. And yeah, when I started ACOR, it was only 3 of us: Mike Eckhart, Jody Russell, and myself, along with a great volunteer group of a board of directors and an advisory board that included everyone from Roger Ballantyne to Nancy Floyd, to Ira Aaron Price, to Mark Reedy, John Mullen, Matt Cheney, so many others. I could rattle off at least 40 to 50 names of individuals that came together. And what was interesting was Mike Eckhart always said, if we had started ACOR after 9/11, so the first meeting of ACOR, of the brain trust to start up ACOR, was actually about a month or 2 before 9/11. And I think the timing of that is important, right? Because I think after 9/11, we all quickly realized there is a need here for energy independence and to get us off of this addiction to oil, right? That has caused so much strife in so many different ways. And so ACOR, like you said, we pulled up our bootstraps. I think we had $250,000 in the bank. And I was really brought on to help really give it a business development angle, a program, set up a membership and corporate relations program that eventually grew to over 900 corporations really joining in and saying, listen, we are all renewables here. We're not solar versus wind versus storage versus hydropower versus geothermal, right? We are one industry. And I think that message of unity still does apply today. And as ACOR, I think, grows, it started up the first leadership council of CEOs to get together to be a brain trust. It started up this great program called the U.S. Partnership on Renewable Energy Finance, which is the first time Wall Street came together to seriously talk about serious money behind renewables, right? I think ACOR has advanced with the industry and has adapted to the industry. And one of the newest programs that I really want to point out is the Accelerate program that's led by Constance Thompson over there at ACOR. And that's a program that looks at really lifting up and empowering CEOs from marginalized communities that are going to make an impact in renewables, right? They are the new risk takers. And so I'm really excited. I got a very sizable donation for an anonymous source to donate books to those kinds of leaders. And so I'm really happy to be donating those books when I'm in Washington next week on the 9th for my DC launch party. And I really want everyone, all the listeners on this, every follower on this podcast to really look at that program and support it in whatever way possible. And like you said, Tim, we all have a role to play. We all can be mentors. We can all pay it forward. And I encourage everybody to do that. I mean, even taking 15 minutes every week to talk to somebody who reaches out to get involved in the industry. If you multiply that out, 15 minutes, one person impacted every week, 52 weeks in the year, boom, you've helped that many people get into the industry. So I definitely want to riff off that too.
Yeah, and just so our listeners understand, that is one of the most gratifying parts of my entire life, is helping individuals further their careers in clean energy. It is so vital. We have to get thousands and thousands, actually tens and tens of thousands more people involved in the clean energy industry, because we're on a pace now with the IRA legislation that we just passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, right? We're going to triple just the solar industry in the next 5 years, right? We're going now at a clip of 60% year-over-year growth just in solar. That's not to speak of wind or energy storage, both of which are also on massive growth curves. So this is the opportunity of a lifetime. It is also the wealth transfer opportunity of a lifetime. If you're a wealthy individual, you can make a lot of money by investing in entrepreneurs and startups and energy projects. There's a role for everyone, whether you're at the bottom of the pyramid or the top, so to speak. So, Tom, what other organizations, I'm glad you gave us a little background on ACOR. We also have, ACP, American Clean Power, which started as a storage organization and a wind organization. And then we have SEIA. Can you riff a little bit on those two organizations? Oh, and then let's not forget ACES.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, ACES, I have to start off hats off. I mentioned ACES in the book, and there's a chapter on the history, right, to give a context to how all these risk takers emerged in the industry against this context of an industry that had its up and downs, as a roller coaster. ACES was phenomenal when it started, and it continues to be really powerful in assembling individuals, right, that support solar energy across the United States and globally. So ACES has grown exponentially since the 70s, I want to say. ACP, formerly OEA and Energy Storage Association, right, that continues to have an amazing mandate to really unite and bring together folks to really hammer through policies like the IRA. SEIA under Abby Hopper plays an immense role for the solar energy industry, and especially when you look at community solar and distributed generation, which I know, Tim, you and I are a little more biased on the DG side of the business, but I see such a future there. And talk about providing reliable, equitable access to energy, right? When you think of community solar and the impact it can have on low to moderate income housing, right? So SEIA plays an immense role in a lot of that. There are also two affinity groups I just definitely want to give a shout out to. One is the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, CELI, that really is pulling together the brain trust, the next generation of renewables leaders. If you're available to mentor, if you're available to teach, if you're able to support through your company, definitely take a look at CELI and Esther Morales and their team there. Another group obviously is RISE, that has for so many years grown under Kristen Graff, who's going to be passing the baton to a new executive director. I really want to give a shout out to her because she did amazing things in the last 15 years with our organization. And RISE now has really become the place, if you're a female executive looking to really impact renewables, the place to meet other female executives that really have formed a support network. Because in many ways, when you enter these companies, right, when you enter into renewables and you're new into renewables, you want to see somebody like you that you can mimic, they can emulate, they can grow your career to be like. And so having RISE formulate so many mentorship programs, including the Solar RISE Fellowship with Grid Alternatives is just vital. So yeah, those are just the groups I wanted to give a shout out to.
And, shout out to Abby Hopper at SEIA. She herself is a great example of somebody who segued from oil and gas to clean energy, right? So it's, those stories are all over the place. And, but it truly is the individuals that make this industry what it is. And that is, I kind of think of the characters that you tell the stories of in this book as the roots of this tree. And you often refer to the oak tree. You have a fondness for oak trees, and I do too.
Not for breaking their leaves, though, right? I mean, especially since the fall time. This is when I have a love-hate with oaks during the fall time when you rake leaves.
Well, you can't have the good without the bad, right? It's a whole enchilada. It's a yin and a yang. But we individuals, we are all pillars, right? We all have a role, and together we are creating an amazing energy transition. It is happening. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of how fast, right? And can we do it fast enough? And yes, we have to have a sense of urgency. But there's so much optimism. There's so much light at the end of the tunnel now because we have the technology. And as Jigger likes to say, it's deploy, deploy, deploy. We truly can just use the technology we have today. Of course, we're going to continue to evolve them and develop new technologies. That's in our blood. We are technologists. But we truly have solar, wind, and battery storage enough to completely green the grid, reduce air pollution, remove carbon from the atmosphere, and create a much safer, healthier future for humanity. And why wouldn't we do that? It's a complete no-brainer. So I mean, I could just go on and on about this. But Tom, what drives you? I'm so curious. And what did you glean from these amazing characters and entrepreneurs and risk takers who are the foundation of our industry? What is it that sets them apart that you resonated with?
I think one of the things I've constantly found fascinating, and Tim, you know me well as others. I'm a talker, right? But at the same time, I'm a listener, and I love to listen to people's stories of how they got involved in renewables, who they've worked with, right? And just proving that this is indeed an industry that's separated by 1 degree of separation, right? And in those stories, right, you find out about the traits that really have driven individuals, and that's what's been really fascinating for me personally. Is what are those traits that together form what we would consider a successful renewables career, right? And so the way I wrote the book, especially the second section of the book, when I go into the individual risk takers, I characterize them by their superpower, by their trait. And funny enough, people ask me, well, did you ask them in the interview, what's the one trait that defined your career or your ambitions, right? None of that, I didn't ask that question. All of them really self-volunteered over and over that trait that they found was something that was a theme in their careers, right? So, I ascribe those traits to those individuals, and my hope is in assembling all those traits, anyone looking to start in this industry or any of us looking for greater inspiration can read these chapters, read up on the trait and go, okay, how do I relate to that trait? And what does that trait play in terms of a role in developing my career, right? So there are traits like persistence. I loved audacity, right? Being innovative, being the first, right? Being adaptable. I wrote a whole book, a whole chapter on foresight. So these are things that I think are really vital in formulating a successful career. And that's what really drove me, not only to write the book, but in my daily conversations. Everyone here has a story, Tim. And, I want to make sure those stories are embodied and encapsulated for future generations to utilize.
I'll just pick a chapter here. Chapter 10, Adventurous, which is the story about SunPower, which is a born and bred American solar panel manufacturer. Tell us about that founder.
Yeah, no, SunPower has so many folks involved. You had Howard Wenger, you had Tim Werner. My current boss actually here at EDP Renewables, Tom Stars, was involved, right? You have this whole team there looking at the American landscape, at the U.S. landscape, and going, listen, we have an opportunity here to create a homebred, U.S. built company that can build out solar panels, right? And that can also innovate the future of what those solar panels can do in the market, right? In terms of developing different market verticals, right? Be it CNI, residential solar, you name it. So, being the California entrepreneurs they were, Tom Werner and Howard and all those folks came together really to create a brand that we still associate with, right? Another brand that very much stands out to me, obviously, is Mike Ahern and First Solar, and the story of how they really created First Solar in Ohio, right? You also hear now stories after the IRA, First Solar committing to developing a manufacturing facility in Georgia. So these companies, what's amazing is these entrepreneurs, they came together, they said there's a need in the market, let's take it on. As you read with SunPower, right, just like everybody else, they all, had to start somewhere, right? I also think to another chapter where I write about an innovation, right, about Dan Sugar and how he started up Nextracker, right? And him being also approached by a colleague going, hey, do you want to start this with me? And going, well, coming home to his wife going, well, how little can I make that will keep us afloat as a family, right? All these kinds of personal sacrifices, right, and risks, but with all this this vision of upside, right, and being able to really win at the end of the day. But yeah, the SunPower story for me is fascinating. And, there's so many other. Julie Blunden was part of the SunPower story. Helen Kendrick. I mean, I can go on. And also SunPower was one of the first solar manufacturers that actually was involved also with the U.S. Department of Defense and supplying them with solar panels, right? So SunPower, I would say, in many ways, as a company, had a lot of first subs that we can definitely follow and still exist today, right? Those panels have been out there now 25, 30 years. And they're still working very well. So, I think the next chapter of SunPower is still yet to be written.
I think of it as a braided stream. So companies start and then they break up, they splinter. Some of them continue. SunPower has been in business for several decades now, but it's evolved and it's spun off entrepreneurs who have started sizable companies of their own. Guys like Matt Campbell at Terabase. Check out episode 75. And he was a repeat guest recently. I can't find that right now. But and then they come back together. I noted that Mark Culpepper was, who's now a figure at Dronebase, was with Edison.
Exactly. And it's funny how someday, I tell people this all the time, never burn bridges in history because of reincarnation, right? Some days we're all on the same side of the table as one team. Other days you find yourself across the table from someone you worked with, right? Negotiating a deal. So it is so vitally important. But yeah, these founding companies in the US market really spun off amazing careers. Like I mentioned, Dan Sugar from Nextracker, right? Also formerly Powerlight SunPower, right? It's really amazing just how interconnected we all are.
And Nextracker is the number one tracker manufacturer in the world, and so Dan is really a legend in the industry, just creating an incredible technology that is so resilient and reliable. And there's other great tracker companies, but Dan stands above the rest, really, right? And now they're onshoring manufacturing in a big way, investing in steel manufacturing in the U.S., which is so wonderful to see how now solar panels, inverters, and racking is more and more being made right here in the U.S. It's a both and. It's a global industry. These are global commodities. And yes, the majority of solar panels are still made overseas, but things are changing. I just was at a ribbon cutting for Hellion Solar up in Minnesota last week, and they're going to be doing 700 megawatts of American-made solar panels in the coming months. So that's just really refreshing to see how our industry is truly becoming an American industry. And it's a little ironic, right? Because PV was an American invention. In 1954 at Bell Labs in New Jersey, Americans invented the modern photovoltaic cell. It converts sunlight to electricity, and we get 5,000 to 10,000 times more sunlight than we could use to power all of society. And so you see that we only need to capture a fraction of the sun's energy. And the way that boils down to the ground is we just need solar panels on 1% to 2% of the landscape. Roads and buildings are already 6%, right? So we're not going to pave over the breadbasket. Landowners and farmers and rural communities can relax. This is actually a good thing for you. You can triple your income if you're a landowner by leasing your land to a solar farmer or a wind farmer, or soon a battery storage farmer, right? Battery farms are coming, and it's a both and, right? And it's so cool that that ACP is a combination of a wind and a battery storage organization. Storage is vital to renewable energy, right? It is a sponge that accepts and gives back on demand, and we need that for a clean, reliable grid. So, Tom, in our last couple minutes together, I'm very curious. What do you have to say to other professionals, whether they're already in clean energy or considering and learning and thinking about a career in clean energy? What do you have to say to these people?
It's quite simple. Take the risk, right? All of us should be empowered to take the risk. In an industry where we're being told to be risk averse, right, and mitigate risk, right? In order to get to the next evolution of this industry, we all need to take a risk, and that's everyone coming into the industry, who's taking a risk on getting into a new industry that might not know a lot about, right? To those of us who have been in the industry, 15 plus, 18 plus, 20 plus years, right? That are looking for, that are maybe in a job where we feel, are we truly making impact and questioning ourselves? This book is meant to inspire us to say, our journeys are constantly evolving. It's not only about the destination, but the journey, right? And I think we all can add to the success we're going to have in renewables. And the next 10 years under this IRA, right? We have a lot to do. We have to figure out, I would say the three things that really need to be focused on is transmission build out, right? Second thing is figuring out supply chain and building out U.S. domestic manufacturing, right? And the third one is how do we really unclog permitting, siting, issuances on the county, state level, right? Where we do have a backlog of projects that need to interconnect, right, and to be built. So we need people who can help us figure out how to get through those challenges, but also people who inspire us to keep on going. And that's basically my call out to everybody: just take the risk. You might fail, but guess what? The more failures you accumulate, the more lessons you've accumulated, right? And that's going to help you be an ultimate success. And we are industry here who's here to support you in your success. So I think that's my last message. It's just be there, be a risk taker, and encourage others around you and challenge others around you to reach their potential in this renewables industry.
Well, I echo your message. I wholeheartedly agree. There really is no such thing as failure. There's only a learning experience, and you pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you move forward. And there is something greener ahead. Every crisis is an opportunity. There's way more opportunity in the long run than there is failure or fall down. So, well, Tom, how can our listeners find out more about the book?
Definitely. Well, I have a QR code. I got this correct now. I always pointed in the wrong direction. Here's a QR code to the website. The website is simply wetooktherisk.com. Definitely appreciate your support. You'll see there that there's a number of places you can buy the book. As Tim alluded to, I've created partnerships with a number of independent book stores across the country. I believe that bookstores in neighborhoods are the cornerstone of society in a lot of ways. So you'll see Powell's in Portland is there, The Strand, and Shakespeare and Company. Shakespeare and Company was the first independent bookstore that approached me to partner up. They're also on there, and many other bookstores, Blue Willow here in Houston, and a couple other places in San Francisco. So please feel free to support them, as well as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and anywhere else you buy your books. So that's the greatest support. And please, if you do buy a book, drop a review. And please be in touch. My contact information, all that is on the website. And like Tim said, we're all here to support you. So, welcome to the renewables industry, or if you're in the industry, let's partner on a deal and let's get going.
Check out wetooktherisk.com. I want to thank Tom Weirich, the author and head of marketing for EDPR North America, for coming on the Clean Power Hour. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review, especially a review on Apple or Spotify. We also have a wonderful YouTube channel. Please subscribe on YouTube. Just go to cleanpowerhour.com and click on the YouTube icon. I want to thank you, Tom, for coming on the show. What a wonderful story. I'm so grateful. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage.